Hi there everybody and welcome to this week's Art of Procurement podcast. I'm the host, Philip Heidson, and today I'm joined by Fraz Baig. Fraz is a long-time listener and a friend of the show who is a senior manager at Ace Hardware. Fraz manages all of Ace's corporate spend, including IT, marketing and supply chain. And as Fraz and I have got to know each other, I learned about the successes he and his team have had at Ace in building strong partnerships with their stakeholders. One of the fundamental pillars to that success is a collaboration model that really explicitly lays out the roles and responsibilities of both the procurement team and their stakeholders as they engage in category management and sourcing projects. And so I invited Fraz onto the show to explain a little more about the model and his learnings from its implementation and its evolution. And I also learned that Fraz recently set up a not-for-profit organisation, and I actually wanted to start our conversation right there to learn a little bit more about it. So in my first question, I asked Fraz if he could just share a little bit more about this endeavour.
So very happy to, and I'm glad we're starting off with that question because that's something that's very near and dear to my heart. So as a father of two toddlers, I have a soft spot in my heart for kids. I've been fortunate enough to have the ability to volunteer my time and money to help individuals and family less fortunate than us. So recently, my wife and I, along with like-minded friends, started a not-for-profit organization. The name of the organization is Flying Mustangs. Right. And really the vision for the not-for-profit is to provide a platform to help individual volunteers make a difference in their communities. Some of the areas that we're focusing on is early childhood development, education, and healthcare, and really near and dear to me is the eradication of poverty within their community.
So is this is it a local nonprofit or is it something that's a little bit broader in terms of its reach?
Yeah, so it's really started off with more of a broader reach, and some of the folks that we're working with today are actually located in Greece. As some of your listeners may know, there's a refugee crisis that's taken. And so we're helping with the individual volunteers within those camps. Provide, for example, an example of the way that we're helping is really providing art supplies to those camps. And so there's children and families within the camps that, not only use the art supplies to draw, but it's really a form of therapy for them to express their feelings and what they've gone through as they've made the plight from their homeland to these refugee camps. And in return, what we do is auction off those art pieces to raise funds back for the family so they may be able to provide a better opportunity for back home.
If anybody's listening, how can they find out a little bit more? Is it just a matter of getting in touch with you? Is there a website they could go to? Because I'm sure that some of the things that you talked about there would really resonate, and I'm sure there may be listeners who are interested to know a little bit more about what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've the best way to participate and learn a little bit more would be to contact me directly. Setting up a not-for-profit and through the government is the long-winded process. So we're in the process of not only setting it up within the state of Texas, where the like-minded friends are based out of, but really having the opportunity to make those charitable dollars count for your tax returns, and to be able to kind of build out that structure a little bit more within domestic U.S. The website will be up and running. But please do contact me, and I'll be able to provide some detail as to where to find these auction pieces and how to get involved.
Okay, cool. What I'll do is I'll share the show notes URL towards the end of the show, but I'll include your contact details there if anyone would like to get in touch.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So let's talk procurement. A couple of questions I actually ask a lot of the times when I'm interviewing procurement leaders on the practitioner side. So first of all, did you choose procurement, or is it something that you kind of stumbled across?
Yeah, so as a kid, I wanted to be a pilot, and as a college student, a lawyer. So to answer your question, procurement kind of chose me. Yeah, I did my undergrad in business as I prepared to take my LSATs while I was in college, and how I ended up in procurement. 17 years later is I respond to a job post for an IT gig where you're responsible for building the old servers and plugging in all the components and doing some testing. So I needed a gig. It seemed like, hey, I'm doing an undergrad in business. This might be, it's a way to pay the bills, and 15 years later, I'm in procurement, and some of the roles I played throughout my journey to get me here was, after the tech, I moved into more of a development role, so really doing some coding on websites. Then moved into sales, saw a lot of the sales guys and the lifestyles they were living, so that was attractive. So I said, hey, why don't I try my hand in sales? I did some IT sales for a while, and then made the switch from the sales side to more of the procurement side. So I went into more of a consultative role, advising organizations on how they should be purchasing. And I played a procurement manager role, and my current role is as a senior manager within procurement, where I'm really responsible for overseeing all of our corporate spend across IT, supply chain, and marketing.
That's a pretty broad background then. I like the fact you talked about it touches on sales. I think that's always really important, and something that I wish, as I grew through my procurement career, I'd have focused a little bit more on that and kind of getting some of those experiences from outside the function, because I was somebody who always just came up and worked in only the function. And it's only after I left, I guess, that I recognized the value that some of those other experiences can bring, and also different perspectives. I think that you actually approach situations with stakeholders, with executives, they're kind of influenced by some of those past experiences outside of the profession.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the key skill sets that has helped me grow within the role I'm in today. Understanding that the vendors, right, it's a machine on their side, right? Especially when you're dealing with some of these large vendors, everything's very calculated and drawn out. They have a map of stakeholders and kind of the levers that they need to push to get to a deal that's a win for their side. And so what I try to do is really get our ACE house in order to be able to combat. I know that's kind of a strong word, but when you're going through some of these strong negotiations, to making sure that our house is in order. In order to have a agreement that's beneficial for both parties. Yeah,
so you're better prepared, and not. It's one of the things that I always think as well is, if we leave the market to basically dictate the terms to us in whatever it is that we're buying, then ultimately you're not really going to get a win-win relationship. You're probably going to get a relationship where the supplier comes out on top, if you're not at least informed as to what a win-win looks like. And, you're going into any discussion or negotiation with as much information as you possibly can, so that it's just not a one-way stream, kind of a one-way discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. There's many talented individuals on our side of the house, and it's really just ensuring that we leverage everyone's input, and also the market and our network to ensure that we have, as you said, have the right information to make sure it's a win-win for both parties. Yeah,
I think I heard you say about a background in IT and that you were coding at one point. Is that right?
It is, yes.
So how does... I guess you're well positioned to think about the impact of digitization then on procurement, having been in the world of essentially creating product, in the IT world. How do you see technology, digitization actually impacting us as a profession, first of all? What's kind of the art of possible?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so when you think about IT, traditionally, right, and it's still current in the industry today. You're talking about computer systems to support internal business operations, right? You're talking about networks, storage, space, individual skill sets and resources to manage the IT infrastructure to support the organization. And today, in more the digital world, and as I touched on, I'm helping lead the organization forward with kind of what's going on in the digital space, especially, for example, how does supply chain and let's say your organization is looking at a warehouse management system, right? That's core supply chain, but it has an impact to the IT organization and the business outcomes as a whole. And most importantly, how does your end consumer, right, find that beneficial to them, right? So it's hard to put an ROI to it, but it's not IT, right? It's supply chain, but it's all the different individuals working together to deliver an experience to the end user.
Yeah.
For Ace Hardware, it's our retailers and our end consumers. So that's really the change that's going in place, right? You're not thinking, hey, I got to go out and buy widgets, or I got to go buy more servers or more services to support the servers. It's really more from a how do you support the business, and IT is just and the digitalization that's taking place is a big component of how that whole shift is taking place within the industry, and it's going to be impacting IT professionals. So my goal is to really align what's going on in the marketplace and helping my team prepare with our internal stakeholders how to face those new challenges that are being presented from the business and the vendor community.
And so are you, I guess I got a couple of questions off of that. One is, you talked about the goal being to kind of understand what's going on in the marketplace and bring that back in-house. And I'm all for that. It's about spotting those innovations and being a driver of innovation, as opposed to waiting for somebody in the organization to spot something they think might be helpful for them, and then, doing the transactional piece of making it work. I'm interested in ways that you're actually able to go and bring innovation from outside, or at least not even if you're implementing it, actually being aware of it, so you can have those conversations on a peer-to-peer level, if you like, with your stakeholder, as opposed to them talking about some wonderful innovation they've seen and really you not having any idea of it. Yeah.
You know what? Innovation is one of those what I call like a fuzzy word, right? It's we all kind of understand what it means, but in practicality, how do you understand the definition of it for your organization and to drive it forward? And I think I've been fortunate enough to work with many organizations within my career, and they're all in a different cycle of procurement maturity, right? And so within ACE, what I would state is, we've been really empowered. Our role within the organization is very strategic in nature. I know a lot of organizations are transactional and trying to get to that strategic advisor role for their organization. So it's some of the practical advice that I would give to the listeners is your network, right? Develop your network, not only on avenues such as LinkedIn, but really get out to some of those industry conferences. I know ACE prescribes to, for example, Gartner. I've spoken at ProcureCon conferences as well, and being a part of that conversation. So really understanding, where those conversations are within the industry. And, it's a great opportunity to really interact with the vendors in a non-negotiation mode, right?
Kind of like getting to know you.
Absolutely, and where they see the industry going. And so, for example, a lot of times now what the vendors are doing is, kind of bypassing IT and really going to the business, saying, hey, for example, Ace Hardware, there's this new innovative way to do something new on your website, for example, right? And so they're going to bypass IT altogether and go to the business, and then the business is driving the decision. And so I would say historically how it's been done is, you're working with IT and working with the business, and now a lot of the vendors are really bypassing IT and procurement and going right to the business leaders. And so really understanding, for example, a SaaS solution, right? How does that impact the organization? So really taking the time to understand and gather information from the outside and interacting with the vendors and bringing that in-house and coming up with a game plan on how to tackle that change that's going on within the industry is what I would advise the listeners to do.
Yeah, it sounds like that also is requiring much stronger internal partnership, because maybe before there was some traditional lines of engagement, even when you were buying a technology or even when you're buying a service. It's when technology isn't involved, then it's a business decision and you're working with procurement. When technology is involved, they go through IT, and IT involves the business. And now it's all about, one, going straight to the business, but two, pretty much, well, I don't want to say pretty much because that's too broad of a statement. A lot of what we buy actually has technology. There's a technology component of it. So where you had an IT buyer, for example, who would only just be buying some software, some hardware, networking, whatever it may be, now they're actually involved in buying HR services or financial services or whatever it may be because technology is infused in it. And that changes how you need to build relationships with your stakeholders and kind of come together more collaboratively, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the things that our team here at ACE did was really build a RASCI collaboration model. We were a new group within the organization, in a 90-year-old organization, and so it was really important. And one of the challenges we saw is, well, where does procurement fit into what we've been doing historically, right? And so it was, one of the challenges that we took on was to really break down all of the sourcing steps, right? Depending on your organization, it may be 5 or 7.
Yeah.
And then really understanding kind of who are the partners within the business organization, and within the business units themselves that need to be part of that sourcing step.
Yeah.
And beyond that, who is going to be responsible for kind of leading that sourcing step, and who's going to be responsible for providing input and into that, making that decision, and who just simply needs to be informed, right? And who's kind of that technical go-to person, and to lay that out within a RASCI collaboration model and that we've deployed here at ACE really help drive that conversation forward and bring value to our procurement organization and to the business. Because now it was clear in terms of the area of responsibility and how everyone kind of works together. Yeah. And as I took this forward and presented it to the leadership within the organization, it went over well because it was well defined, and there was it was very transparent, right? If procurement's leading the negotiation with the vendor, on the back end, everyone's working collaboratively to make sure that we're all on the same page. Because what the vendor's going to do is call the business, right. call right, and whomever else they know within the organization to get something, to get a bit of knowledge that's beneficial to them. So it's really, as we alluded to earlier, it's really getting our house in order in a structured manner where everyone understands their role and responsibility and is transparent within the organization, and that's really helped our negotiation power with the vendor.
Interesting. So if I could try and visualize the model, for people who are listening to try and visualize it, think of it as being the RASCI, but does it come fine? Is it kind of the typical procurement takes the lead on the sourcing process? We have the business involved from a perhaps an an approver, and from a consultant perspective, or what are the key roles and responsibilities you actually defined and that you split among the business unit and procurement, for example, and IT?
Yeah. So if I could help the listeners visualize it, what I would say is on the left-hand side is where you have your activity, right? And so some of the first ones that you're going to be doing in a sourcing process is gathering and defining the requirements, supplier selection, managing the sourcing activity, right? So that could be done within a tool itself, and then moving that to the final vendor selection. Yeah. And really where it was kind of sticky or fuzzy for the internal stakeholders was ACE is when you get to that negotiation, right, and that strategy piece. It was, I fully understood the business not at first feeling comfortable with doing what they've done historically with the relationships they've built to pass that forward to a third, an internal group within the organization. Yeah. And what I advise them is when you think about that next set of activity, that managed negotiation strategy, it's really broken up into 4 sub-points, I would say. So we have the business term negotiations, which, ultimately the business is responsible for and will own. You have the technical term negotiations. So that's where, when we're working with IT, right, they own that. And what I advise the business is I don't want to take the conversation that you want to have and me have that technical conversation with the vendor, right? I'm not that technical lead on this project. So go ahead and have that conversation with the vendor, but keep me involved. And, whenever the vendor says, hey, that's going to impact pricing, say, that's fine. That's procurement's responsibility. This is what we need from a technical standpoint. Yeah. And we get into the pricing term negotiation. That's really, IP's core role within the managed negotiation strategy bucket of activity. And then there's the legal term negotiation. So it may seem very simple and straightforward to some procurement organizations that are more mature, but for our organization today, it was really important to break that apart and make sure that everyone understands their role and responsibility and how that comes forward. Yeah. And of course, after that set of managed negotiation strategy bucket, you're going to move forward to implementation and management of deliverables. That's where, the conversation I had with IT stakeholders as I was, looking to build this was, hey, at the end of the day, I fully understand that IT is going to be responsible for implementing it. So that's why it's really important that they're leading that technical term negotiation, and they're providing that input into that earlier activity where we're selecting the suppliers to bring into this RFX, right? So everyone's constantly involved in the process, and at the end of the day, after we've delivered on the project, it's very clean in terms of everyone's area of responsibility and where they provided input. So that's the activity on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, right, you're going to have the different groups, which are the business unit, IT, indirect procurement. You might have a financial planning and analysis organization within finance as well, and the legal team involved in the sourcing project.
And so from an indirect procurement perspective, you're then managing all the different handoffs between, as the responsibility shifts, for example, between gathering and defining the requirements all the way through to the different points that you talked about that define a negotiation strategy. You're ultimately coordinating it, but other areas of the business have a responsibility to actually fulfill a certain part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. As I ran through the steps, IP has a role in all of those steps, right? Some of those might be just more informational, right, when it comes to gathering and defining the requirements. But there's certainly a handoff and us driving that process forward. There's certainly, within the organization, there's project managers as well that, again, this is kind of how we operate within the organization. So everyone's has this same information, and everyone, including the project managers, are doing their part to drive the project forward.
So how did you... how were you able to get buy-in from all those different groups? Because you mentioned, I think it was 5 different groups who are actually a part of this engagement model. And for some of them, specifically the business unit, that may require them to actually give up some things that they would like to retain in terms of responsibility. They don't necessarily like to give up control to any other group when it comes to defining a requirement or even negotiations. So how were you able to get everybody to buy into this?
That's a great question. So number one, our organization reports up to our CFO. So we have executive overview of the organization and ensuring that we're delivering to the organization. So for me, it was really important to, as a procurement professional, let me say, it's really important to identify the gaps, right? That's a skill set that I think has served me well. And so historically, our organization had been doing procurement, right? And they've been doing the job they know that they have in addition to doing procurement activities. So for me, it was really important to identify, well, what are those steps that are being done today? And, as a procurement professional, what are the steps that we should be focusing in on more? Where can procurement bring value to what we've been doing historically? So it's really important to, number one, lay out all the steps and educate the business and IT as to what are all the steps in a traditional sourcing process and modifying it to cater to ACE's organization. Yeah. Next step was really, we're a new group within finance, and so it was to determine how are we going to engage moving forward, because it was a challenge, right? We're a 4-year-old group within a 90-year-old organization, so this was a pain point for the organization. So it was, taking responsibility, bringing knowledge, and coming up with a structure that I can take to the stakeholders and lay it out for them to identify all the steps. Then it was to work with the leaders within the organization to say, well, I think IP should be responsible for negotiations, right? And then they pushed back, and then it got into, well, let's break this up, and to make it clear that, hey, at the end of the day, we're not going to take on the ownership of the solution that we purchased.
Yeah.
And so, business, you're still going to be responsible for that. So go ahead and negotiate what you want out of it. And the pricing, right? We're going to leverage our background in negotiations and the inputs that we have from outside the organization to get the best deal possible. And it was a lot of back and forth. I'm not going to say that the first iteration went over extremely well, but it was, let's find the right fit, right? Yeah. This is what we came up with at ACE. It might not be the right fit or the right responsibility for some of those buckets within another organization. So we had to cater it to ACE. And at the end of the day, we're miles and years ahead of where we were just 4 years ago in terms of going to market. And overall, everyone's had to buy in to the process, but it was something that they helped develop. And it was a pain point that we had. And really what it came down to is when we had the final iteration, I had met with all the stakeholders within the organization and had these conversations with them, and then went into the executive room to share that the final product with them. So everyone had already seen it. Everyone had already provided that input. We've had those hard conversations, and so that final presentation to leadership went over really well because we've done a good job of tackling the pain points prior to it being rolled out.
You had everybody on board before you went and sought the final decision.
Absolutely, absolutely, and everyone, the great thing here is everyone loves the organization and wants to do the right thing. Yeah. And so when you kind of take that focus, right, as opposed to, hey, IP wants to go ahead and and get the benefit of negotiating the best deal, right? It's not about that. It's about how do we drive our organization forward and leverage the strengths of all the different leaders that we have and the great talent that we have here at ACE.
Yeah, I think what's really important in the engagement model as well, and this is something that it seems so obvious, but I think that we do sometimes forget about it, is that at the end of the day, the business unit is the one who's responsible for making the vendor or the supplier selection. So you're not trying to take that away from them. You're not trying to push on them suppliers who they might not want to use. You're just trying to help them use the suppliers that they do want to use, or enable them to be able to afford to use the suppliers that they want to use in a way that is more of a win-win, as opposed to it all being one way. It's all on the supplier terms, or they're so unaffordable that the business can't actually work with the suppliers they want to work with.
Absolutely. Just like indirect procurement professionals going out to industry and talking to their network, the business is doing that as well, right? So they know who plays in the space and who plays well in this space, and they have great references. However, our job is to say, yes, they're really good. They're probably who we want, but oh, by the way, there's three other vendors that we've identified that already a part of the organization, or we've heard from the industry that might be worth considering as well. So let's go ahead and bucket them in, and let's go to market, right? Yeah. Give everyone the same information and the same opportunity. And at the end of the day, if we end up with the supplier that you felt was the right one out of the gate, awesome. But if we learn something about another supplier that might be an option and or component that they have that we might want to include as part of an offering from a preferred supplier, right? More, as you alluded to earlier, the better information you have, the better it's going to be for the organization moving forward.
You mentioned about the fact that this is early in your evolution or maturity of procurement. I think you mentioned it being a 4-year-old function in a 90-year-old organization. I'm interested in where this fits in your journey and the evolution, and kind of how it has helped you continue that growth within ACE.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and something that I had to reflect on. In my time here at ACE. So, as I mentioned, I've played I used to once upon a time work for a large Big Five consulting APO organization, and as a consultant, right, you're constantly racing, and you've seen decisions implemented at many organizations that are right based on industry.
Yeah.
And here at ACE, I don't mean to say, obviously, 90-year-old company, awesome, and my job is to make sure that it continues to deliver on its helpful and convenience promise for the next 90 years. And with that, there's tenureship here at ACE. And again, when you say that, sometimes it's taken as negative, and I don't mean that at all, right? I think when you've been in an industry for 20 years, you see things come and go that are just called something different, right? For example, the cloud, right? Yeah. And so it's an opportunity for me to just be taking back to work for, ACE Hardware that, as I say openly, I love this organization. I love the people. I love what it represents. And so for me to kind of, in terms of my professional development, to kind of slow down and rather than give a solution, which I did from when I was a consultant, to, provide the data points and information for the individuals to, go on that journey with me, right, and come to a conclusion. Where in my previous years, it's, X is the answer, we're going to go get X. Where here, it's, it might be X, Y, Z, and let's take those steps and think about those and make sure that, it's right for this culture. And if not right for the culture, how do we adapt it to make sure that it fits where at the end of the day, we're driving ACE forward.
Yeah, I love that. It's like we don't, even if you may have a preconceived notion of what the answer may be, you're not going in there saying, I have all the answers. But I'm going to help you facilitate a conversation so we get to the right place that's right for everybody.
That's a great summarization of my babble. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So as you put the engagement model in place, it was early in your maturity as a procurement function. Where are you now? Where has that enabled you to go? And I guess it's a second part of the question. Maybe it's even two separate questions. How are you then leveraging technology as you're evolving and maturing the procurement organization at ACE?
Yeah, so the RASCI model was something that we put in. I've been at ACE for 4 years. I put that in place 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, as the procurement organization formed, it was really just getting a procurement policy in place and dusting off kind of the different disparate documents, right, and consolidating that and really, putting that together for the organization to have an opportunity to take a look at and review and understand the policy with procurement and the process. And when we talk about the process, 4 years ago, a lot of our internal reviews and approvals were all paper-based, and so what the procurement organization, did with our leader within Indirect Procurement was really put together and implement Ariba, right? Mm-hmm. We use Ariba. It's touched-on tools. So we implemented the contracts module and also the sourcing module. So we utilize the contracts module today, and again, we catered that to ACE to take us out of a paper-based process and have an electronic review and approval of quotes and documents and within the system itself. It obviously allows us to get rid of the paper, but have electronic compliance, what audit can compliance to see if the right folks are reviewing and approving contracts, and then it's a central repository as well, where, when we were looking to build up our contracts and understand where they are within the organization, they were all over the place. They were in people's tasks, folders, computers, and so we really took the lead in terms of putting that solution together. And as far as the sourcing module within Ariba, we're utilizing that to run our events. So we're running RFPs for indirect categories as well. And when you talk about kind of innovation, earlier in the conversation, we've actually extended that out to more of our direct side as well. So our direct merchants are able to leverage the tool, the sourcing tool, to run events. And in terms of bringing innovation forward, I think I'm sure a lot of organizations are doing this already indirect, but for our organization here, that was something that we hadn't looked at for 10 years or so, and so when they saw the result and understood how we can take a review of a category from 8 weeks to 2 hours, right? That was value that IP brought to the organization, and not from a traditional sense, right, in terms of indirect procurement, but really understanding the value that technology can bring and how do you drive ACE forward. And again, if you have that mindset of how to drive your organization forward and and think of that as opposed to, my role is to, reduce spend or, get something quicker and faster in the supply chain. I think that really help your listeners with their personal and professional growth.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm sure the listeners are fed up of hearing me talk about my experiences in outsourcing, but you had two sets of people, one who would put their head in the sand and look at how they can resist change, and another who would actually embrace it and want to figure out how they can best take advantage of the opportunities that outsourcing at its time, this was probably 10 years ago, presented to them. And those that put their head in the sand were really badly affected. Those that embraced it were able to drive what the future looked like. And also, if that future then didn't include them, their organization, I've outsourced myself out of a role before, but those skill sets are then in demand on the outside. So it's just about trying to take advantage of all these new technologies and figuring out how you can use them to your advantage rather than trying to resist them, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's always about thinking outside the box, right? Yeah. I think the talent within the procurement space is really going to push the procurement organization further and align to some of those challenges that we're being faced with from the vendor community and digitalization. And so, just another example I'll just touch on real quick is in terms of our group having. Growing our footprint within the organization is, again, when you think about traditional procurement, you're aligned maybe to a business unit or a category, and you're just traditional sense trying to drive efficiency and drive down costs. And so, yes, that's a component of what we do. But beyond that, Ace Hardware, right, we're 5,000 retailers strong now, and a lot of the readers, listeners might not know this, but Ace is a co-op, so all those individual stores, or I would say majority of those individual stores are individually owned and operated. So under our leadership, what we did was take a look at, hey, we have corporate contracts in place for spend categories, right? So, for example, IT. And our retailers are purchasing IT components to help with their individual stores. And so how about we take those contracts and those pricing and give the retailers an opportunity to take advantage of that as well, right? Yeah. And so what that involves is conversations with our, with groups within our organization that aren't traditionally involved with, indirect spend. Yeah. And we really built out a group called Saving Source within the organization, where we take package deals that corporate indirect procurement has put together and have the retailers an opportunity to take advantage of that and lower their operating costs. So at the end of the day, that drives Ace that drives Ace forward and helps the retailers reduce their operating costs. So that's just another example of innovation that we touched on earlier, and kind of out of box thinking. That's I think is going to be required of procurement professionals moving forward.
Yeah, you become a GPO for your retailers essentially.
Yep. And exactly.
So I know that it's about time to wrap up, and I had one final question, and it's about digital transformation, because you've mentioned it in a couple of answers to some of the questions today, but also we talked off mic, and I know that's something that you're really passionate about, especially with the IT background that you have. So I just wondered, how do you think digital transformation will actually change the role of procurement?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I appreciate bringing a highlight to that, because I think that's really what's driving our industry, right? And so at a very high level, in terms of how procurement, business, and vendors interact, historically it's been, within IT, right? That's the projects are coming to IT, and the vendors are hitting IT to drive the business forward. And what you see is a little shift in terms of how vendors approach to organizations, and a lot of times they're working with the business directly, or reaching out to the business executives directly to drive change. And so, not saying one way is right or wrong, but it's really about understanding the business, again, aligning internally to understand some of the changes that are happening in the marketplace, and being able to set up a structure internally to what's going on in the marketplace to be able to counteract to what's going on in the industry. And that's my goal within my role across IT, supply chain, and marketing is to making sure all those components of the business are talking to each other and driving that change within ACE.
Are you seeing other... So we talk maybe fancifully about technologies like blockchain and RPA, and I know that I've been as guilty as others in bringing these kind of to the fore, because I think they're just... While I have no idea what their impact may be, I think it's something that we have to be aware of. I just wonder if you, given, again, your background is more in the IT, the digital space, what your perspective is on those emerging technologies. Are they kind of fanciful at the moment, or can they be transformative?
I think they definitely have to be transformative in nature, right? I think what you see is this within the industry, a lot of large, big vendors, mega vendors buying up all those smaller technologies. Because in terms of adaptability for organization, it allows them to adapt quicker and faster and keep up with the competition at hand. And so, again, one of our challenges is how do you take a 90-year-old company and make it nimble? And that's the challenge I'm looking to help solve for ACE moving forward.
So, this is, I always say, the easiest question, given the fact that we do have to wrap up now. I just wonder if you could share where listeners could find out more, both about the journey that you've been on, connecting directly with you, but also about the nonprofit Flying Mustangs that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, so the best way to contact me is LinkedIn, Fraz Baig. I know you're going to go ahead and provide that information to the reader. And really, it's connect with me directly, and I'm happy to share my input, my journey, and see how I can help you and your organization, or vice versa. And I'll have more information on Flying Mustangs within the coming months, but I'll be able to share some of that more information and details when we connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much again, Fraz, for joining me. The show notes with your contact details will be at artofprocurement.com/ACE. That's artofprocurement.com/ACE. I've really appreciated talking to you, so thank you.
Thank you, Philip.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.